Hello and welcome, Zeldathon friends and team alike, to the very first ever Zeldathon Book Club. Thank you for coming, everyone. I am super glad that we were able to get this thrown together. So many of you were excited about it during SideQuest, and yeah, you asked for it, you get it. Two book librarian nerds talking with you about books for 2 hours. It's been great. How are you doing today, Mags?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited that I finished the book on time.
Yay! Last night, right?
Yeah, it was definitely last night and not first thing this morning.
Where's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is I read this book many, many times in the past.
Right.
Yeah. It was just a nice refresher, and like once again, as I always do whenever I finish this book, I just had that kind of like moment reading the last page where I just kind of feel like
it's such a good way to end the book.
I miss this book already. I miss it as soon as it's over.
That is definitely the mark of a good book. I get that same feeling every time I finish Lord of the Rings, which has been a while, but back in the day.
Yeah, definitely. And like, just so everybody in chat knows, it is okay if you have not read this book. We might tread a little bit into spoiler territory, but with everything that's going on these days, if you're struggling with your concentration, like some of us are, it's okay. And it's okay to give yourself that kind of like grace and time. And if there are other ways that you can engage by listening to the book or by even watching the movie, that's cool too. We're just happy that y'all are here, and we're really excited to have just some really nice, thoughtful conversations using the book as a launching off point for us.
Yeah, which actually, Max reminds me, I did throw together a quick straw poll just so we can get an idea of where everyone has come from on book knowledge. So, poll asks you, did you read it? Did you watch it? Did you both? Did you neither but are here to hang out? And that is perfectly valid because we are all friends here and we just like talking with each other. But it's interesting to see how these things fall out, especially we did this right before, like when we announced it, basically, like before it had been assigned, and there were rather a lot of you that had watched it but never read it, and I think that's pretty common with like a lot of movie to book adaptations, especially if you weren't like around right when the book came out. So yeah, let's see how. All right, so far everyone that is answered has read it, and most have also watched it. So
I don't have the poll in my chat.
What?
Where's the poll?
It was after.
Oh well, it's okay. I did read the book. There's my answer.
All right, and yes, it is on Disney Plus if you have Disney Plus. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think other services that you can like rent movies from, you can rent it, but yeah, you're
right, just for like additional fees. But
yeah, so that might have been a problem for our Euro friends if there's like licensing restrictions on that, which is a bummer.
Yeah.
I have not watched the movie yet, but I think I would like to sometime in the next few days.
Yes,
so
I did. I watched it for the first time on Monday. It was this past week, so which is I'm sure this will come up, but it's definitely an interesting experience when first of all you're watching a movie as an adult that most people watched for the first time as a kid, and also when you've been living in the book for so long, and so it's like, oh, they changed that.
Yeah, Mojo is pointing out that apparently Louis Sachar worked on the screenplay.
Yes, he actually has a cameo in the film itself. So I will not. He does. I will not spoil for you which character. I mean, it is like a very brief one.
I recognize.
But no, I was looking at IMDb later, and I was like, oh, that's the author's name. Which character was this? And like, of course, Google is like, hey, the author was in the book. Here's the scene he was in. So that, yeah. See if you could figure it out in your initial watch, and then check your answers later.
Okay.
But it's a fun little
Cool.
hint.
Little Easter egg.
Little Easter egg.
Sweet. Well, before we dive into more of our planned discussion, wanted to offer a couple of quick reminders to folks. Be sure to join the Zeldathon Discord, where we have a book club channel. If one of our handy dandy mod friends would like to post a link to the Discord in the chat, that would be great. And after this conversation today, so after 4 p.m. today, book club channel will become a spoiler friendly zone for holes. So if folks have more thoughts that they want to share that engage throughout the course of the story, go ahead and put all your thoughts and feelings in the channel there, and we can keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and of course we will have more community streams coming up on this same channel. As far as we know, there's not anything planned for next week, but most Saturdays at 4 p.m. there will be something. And future book clubs will also be at 4 p.m. instead of 2 p.m. Eastern. We kind of put this together before stuff had been finalized, but we're going to try to stay consistent with everything else from now on, so that y'all know what time we're showing up.
Let's go, community team.
Yeah.
We got this. Yeah, and then one quick announcement from our social team as well. If anybody's working on some cool, fun fall arts and crafts, particularly if they're like Zelda or video game themed, and you want to tweet them or, at any of our Zeldathon social channels, we would love to see what you're working on and possibly give you a reshare so we can share the boosts. So let us know what's up with y'all. We love engaging with folks even between our marathons.
Mm-hmm. All right. Are we ready to jump right in, do you think?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
All right. Yeah.
Are you ready, chat? You ready? Do you have feelings?
Are you ready?
Yeah, ready, chat?
Aye,
aye! Always sister. That's good enough for me. So we already talked about this a little bit, but like the very first thing I wanted to be sure to cover with everyone is that just acknowledging the fact that, especially with everything that's going on right now, pandemic life sucks, and it's okay if you're having a hard time getting into reading, but talking about books and stories that we enjoy can really help. So it's definitely my hope, and I'm sure it's Trina's as well, that by having this conversation today, maybe we can all feel a little more inspired to engage with our stories a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, OC said he wanted the book to be longer.
I also want the book to be longer, OC. I agree.
Leave him wanting more.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe a good place to start is the song. And we didn't talk about this while we were prepping, but it's something that like really resonates with me so much, and I highlighted the 2 pieces of it. So if you'd indulge me, Trina, I'd like to read it out.
Oh, go for it.
So, if only the woodpecker sighs, the bark on the tree was just a little bit softer, while the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely. He cries to the moon, if only. And then I totally forgot that you hear the second half of the song at the very, very end. If only, the moon speaks no reply, reflecting the sun and all that's gone by. Be strong, my weary wolf, turn around boldly. Fly high, my baby bird, my angel, my only.
Right, or I think it wasn't even like necessarily a second half, because remember the original song was in Latvian, and right. So the first Stanley, translated it in one way, and so apparently the Zeroni family translated it another way. But I like that, honestly, like aspect of it, like when you're localizing things, sometimes people don't always make the same choices, but they can still be good choices. But... Yeah,
no, and it's a good question, because like, I mean, the content, even being translated, the content is substantially different. So I do think they're like 2 different verses, but it also had struck me that same thing that you were talking about, like maybe Zero or Hector's mom had sung the whole song to him, and because it had been translated by Stanley's ancestors, particularly maybe there was like some difference in the translation, which would be really interesting to see how that came through. Inka, I know, read the book in Dutch, and I'm curious, Inka, if you could put in chat. Yeah, I see she said the songs make zero sense in the Dutch translation.
Oh no!
Oh no! I mean, they're definitely kind of like poetry, which I've always found very cerebral and difficult to understand. I'm not a big poetry person in general. It was better in the original Latvian, says Hipster. But I'm curious, Inka, like what sort of differences you notice in the Dutch translation of the poems?
Or just, the translation in general. I remember she mentioned something about one of the characters' names that I thought was really funny, but I will let Inka bring that up if she wants to.
Right, I remember she said that Stanley's name is the same,
right?
Because like the Stanley Yale Nuts thing is like too on the nose to really translate, but the kids' nicknames were translated, which is funny.
I'm remembering Mr. Sir. She said, and I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, Inka, but it me or the here, like, it looked a little bit like it should be, like, it looks like it should rhyme. Does it rhyme? Because if it rhymes, that makes it like an extra level of ridiculous.
Is that Mr. Sir?
Yeah.
Oh, funny.
It does. Yes. Yes, we need to get Inka to say that out loud for us at some point. But yeah, no, translated to literally is I think, I mean, localization is hard. And yeah, that is.
It's too bad, because I feel like this song is one of the more poignant pieces of this whole story. It's one of the common threads that follows really these two families, three if you count the warden's family descending, but it's one of the threads that follows these families through the generations, and like has a real impact on their lives, and it's something that's really important to both of the families. I think it's really interesting that even though it's framed as like a bad thing that Stanley Yelnats the First did, that he stole the pig from Madame Zeroni,
or Elia.
Elia, not Stanley, but uses the same letters. Interesting. That Elia stole the pig, but like he keeps the song. He doesn't even keep the pig. But the song is the piece of his interaction, his relationship with Madame Zeroni, that he keeps with him and that he passes down through the generations. And it's also like the piece that kind of unlocks the way that Stanley is able to finally pay back the Zeroni family when he's carrying Hector up the mountain, and then he sings the song to him at the top of the mountain. It's so beautiful.
It is. It's just like everything is right with the world, and then everything else becomes right with the world.
I see Ilya saying Kate Barlow deserved better. Hard agree. It's such a tragic story.
I can fix that.
Yeah, so I did have a question as we're talking about the like narrative style and how I think it's really interesting how the past kind of interplays with the present throughout the whole story. But I wanted to ask everybody, if you did read this book as a kid, I'm wondering how your relationship has changed with it as you've gotten older. One of my favorite things about kids' literature, especially stuff that I read as a kid, is coming back to it again and again and seeing what different messages I get out of a story that I didn't pick up on when I was a kid. But my life experiences have changed, and so the way I relate to a certain story, even though the story stays the same, I am different. so the relationship necessarily changes.
Yeah, and I mean, both like our own experience, but also I think how the world around us has changed can affect how we view it a little bit because, with what has been going on the last few months, like the whole like, basically prison system aspect of this book, I feel like pops out a little more than, even if we had done this book last year, like would that have popped to the front of my mind as quick as it did?
Yeah, for sure. And as white people, it's definitely something that we kind of have to train into ourselves to even pick up on, because so many times in our lives we don't have to interact with, the idea of race relations unless we're like directly confronted with it. And that is definitely a through line in this novel that kind of like lies just under the surface, but never really quite pops up to the top. So like you really only have to interact with it if you choose to.
Right.
Except for like just a couple of very overt moments, like with the relationship between Sam and Kate, and the village essentially attempting to lynch them,
right,
for their relationship, or like when Stanley is letting Hector dig his hole for him, and the other boys start like kind of bullying Stanley and calling him a slave master, which like from Stanley's perspective, like partially like we can see how he thinks that that's not really fair, but as Stanley kind of learns and grows and develops, he also begins to acknowledge like, oh, actually, even though Zero or Hector agreed to this deal, it's actually not okay.
I would say the optics of it at the very least are questionable. It's like, okay, I can see how this does not look great. Okay.
Yeah, no, the optics are definitely very bad, but also, it's not actually a fair deal. Stanley has more power in the relationship, which is the knowledge that Zero obviously desperately wants access to. Like, he's a really smart kid. He just never had the opportunity to learn to read. But he's clearly very, very sharp. And so, he goes the extra mile just to be able to get what he wants out of Stanley, which is for him to teach him how to read. But Stanley comes to the realization, like, he was telling himself that he needed the energy to be able to teach, but Hector was digging just as much, if not more, and he also needed the energy in order to learn. So like, it really wasn't a fair deal.
Yeah. Mojo has mentioned in the chat that the race aspects are definitely downplayed in the movie, which is interesting. Like, again, I know you haven't watched it yet, but like with the whole Sam and Kate thing in the movie, they don't actually address why they weren't supposed to kiss each other and why Sam is gonna get hung for like it's. Like as a kid, you could, if you didn't know that like racism was a thing, you could always just be like, wow, they just really don't like that one guy in particular. It's because the other guy wanted to date her, right? Like, and that's it. It's very odd, given how like there are many more things in the movie that they explain a lot more explicitly than was in the book, where like the book left you to infer some things until like later on at least. And it was just like, I'm going to explain things to you. Except that one thing. So that part I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that's really too bad. Yeah. I'm trying to catch up on chat and see what folks are saying. Hipster saying it's weird how if you've read the book, your brain fills in the gaps. That makes total sense.
Inca was very impressed with Hector's math skills. He's a very smart boy. Also, the the deal with the hole digging situation also doesn't make as much sense in the movie because, in the book, Stanley actually, like, gets out the hole and just is sitting there while Zero digs for, like, an hour. in the movie, Zero is down in the hole at the same time as him and, like, helping out. And I feel that's harder to be like, how do you know Zero didn't just, like, jump down in of his own, like, what is Stanley supposed to do? Pick him up and throw him out of the hole? Like, again, it's just, like, they're little changes, but I feel like tonally it makes certain things not make sense.
It adds up, and, you know, like, on the one hand, it's, I guess it portrays things in a less racially fraught kind of way, but on the other hand, it also kind of obscures those hard lessons that Stanley has to work through and kind of figure out for himself. Like, as someone with the power of the knowledge, like, it also kind of was his responsibility to make sure that the deal that he and Hector came up with was fair to them both. But, you know, coming into the camp in the first place, Stanley had really been trained into a victimhood mindset by his whole family. You know, everything that went wrong, they blame it on the no good, dirty, rotten
pig stealing great-great-grandfather.
Whereas I feel like through the course of the story and through the like true trials that he's put through, he kind of begins to learn to take responsibility for himself and his actions. And the moment where, you know, he decides to carry Hector up the hill or up the mountain, it's not just like a magical absolvence and completing the contract that his ancestor made with Hector's ancestor, but, you know, it's also a moment where, like, he consciously decides that he has to keep going, he has to get Hector up the hill, and he has to save both of their lives, and he takes responsibility, and for that they're both rewarded.
Going back to chat, see what we're talking about. Yeah, just, like, the way that chat's kind of just talking about the fact that the kids being different races is sort of, like, glossed over. It's hard, like, there is the line that directly is like, these 3 kids are black, these 3 kids are white, and this one's Hispanic. But they were, I think, hold on, I have the actual, like, quote written down. But, like, the dirt mall makes them the same color was what Stanley's takeaway from. Yeah, on the lake they were all the same reddish-brown color, the color of dirt, which, I don't know, you could make an argument for, like, you know, up until, like, certain points of the book, it does seem like just, like, well, they're being all treated the same level of crappy. But, you know, when you do get into the exchange with Zero and Stanley, it's just like, that doesn't mean that people aren't, you know, that's still part of them. That's still part of how they're going to view what's going on in the world around them. But this was, this is the era that Holmes was written in, though, where it was like, people are different colors. But we're not going to treat them differently, because surely that will fix everything if we don't acknowledge their differences.
We treat everyone the same except for Zero.
Right.
Mr. Pendansky is super mean too.
Yeah, Mr. Pendansky, the, like, I'm the one that's here to believe in you guys, that you guys can turn your life back around, even though they're not being given any schooling while they're at this school, at this camp for over a year. And you guys have worth, except you, Zero, you filthy, hole-digging worm. Like...
Yeah, and Mojo's asking, what the F was up with that? I think it kind of underlines the hypocrisy of the character of Mom, in that, you know, he tries to have these, like, powwows with the boys and try to, like, make them, you know, think about how they can better themselves and come out and become functioning members of society, and yet he still chooses to work in like a labor camp, essentially, that is massively exploitative of these boys and their poor life situations that led them to be here. And so I don't know, when he's talking to Zero, because zero, like truly when he is in his zero persona, he like almost nobody sees him as a person. He has nobody. He has nothing in the world. And so that's the moment where you see the mask slip is, you know, when I think, what is this like I feel like it's a Dumbledore quote when take the measure of a man not by the way he treats his equals, but by the way he treats his inferiors.
I don't know if that is Dumbledore, but yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah. So like that just kind of shows that he kind of acts like a nice guy, but like I don't know, the quality of the character under there.
Chat says it's serious.
It's serious.
Thank you, people who know your Harry Potter quotes better than us.
Thank you, chat. I knew it was Harry Potter.
But yeah, like it almost makes you wonder, like, is this actually how, Pendanski and like maybe other members of the staff feel about the boys, and it's just like, oh, we can't, you can get away with treating Zero the way you actually want to treat the others because who is going to yell at you for it, whereas like all the other kids will get back to civilization eventually and they might tell their parents and the parents probably won't believe them, but let's not like, let's not get ourselves into too much trouble. I don't know.
Yeah, Ilya says kind of reminds her of the prison experiment. A little bit.
Stanford, yeah.
Yeah, if you give people ultimate power over folks, how are they going to act? Yeah, Mojo pointing out all the other kids have family. Yeah, they do.
Which, like, okay, like, clearly this camp has been around for, like, we don't know how long it has been Camp Green Lake rather than just the home of the Walkers where they did all the digging. But, like, this place has been around for a while, and, like, have any of the other kids ever tried telling, like, their I mean, the families probably haven't believed them, because it's like, well, you did something wrong, you went to basically jail, why would we trust you? But the fact that Stanley is, like, sending letters to his home, I'm like, have other kids ever tried sending letters? Because, like, Stanley's don't need to be censored, because he's lying about what camp is like. And the other ones, maybe they're just like, it's terrible, they're doing such and such, please get me out. And, it's like, oh yeah, I'll send this for you. Shoop, shoop, shoop. But, I don't know, like, I mean, places, like, cruddy places do exist, like this, and there are people who try to... It's not as unrealistic as I'd like to think. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, and we definitely have more to say a little bit later on that topic. I'm coming back to this question about how the relationship with the book has changed as we've gotten older. I'm trying to think of something that I kind of experienced particularly in reading or like watching kids lit or kid shows or movies. Like for me, I realized that I was growing up into an adult when like watching a TV show for teens. I noticed that I was starting to relate more to the parents in the show than the kids. And I think as an adult, like definitely related to this conversation that we're having about Mom, it's like, I feel much more critical and, like I'm giving a lot of side eye to the adults in this story.
Yeah, I mean, like, the warden, from the get-go is, like, a pretty cruddy adult, and Mr. Sir is a pretty cruddy adult. But, like, as a kid, you're like, oh, Mr. Pendanski, he's okay. And, yeah, no, as an adult, you're just like...
He's not okay.
What are you doing here, dude?
Yeah, and he, like, I had even forgotten that he actively takes part in that scene at the end, where, they have the briefcase and the yellow-spotted lizards are there. Like, he's not a nice guy in that scene. He's very much on, like, Team Warden, get the case away from the kids. How are we going to hide their bodies?
Yeah.
The mask is off.
It's like, at the very least, he's an enabler.
Right, and like maybe
definitely beyond that.
Maybe a part of the conversations that he was trying to have before with the kids is like him playing the good cop to Mr. Sir's bad cop.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they're both cops and they don't have the kids' best interest at heart.
But yeah. I've run out of things to say.
It's okay. I'm reading Mojo's comment about it's really horrific to see the blatant disregard for human life. And that is something that I also notice, like rereading kids' books. Some of the things that I see are like horrify me as an adult because they are so against like what has been ingrained in me in terms of morality. But I think it is so interesting when children's literature doesn't underestimate kids and doesn't actually shy away from having them confront some of these like really harsh realities and situations, and instead like gives the kids in the story the opportunity to engage with these big questions head on. It's like one of my favorite series is the His Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman, and I just reread them again this year in a different book club with internet friends. But I'm always taken, especially reading like the first book. I mean, the whole series is kind of like about the story of Lyra growing up, but as a kid, like in the very first book, they're still even confronted with some like really scary, very real things, and the way that kids kind of like play off the like fear of the gobblers early on, and kind of like turn it into a game that they play amongst themselves to help them kind of process that fear, I think is really interesting. And it's so helpful, I think, for kids who do read these books to see those kinds of models in the characters that they read about, like see how children can process really tough, difficult situations in order to help the kids who are reading develop more resilience.
Chet is still talking about Mr. Pendanski. Okay, the book never claims he's a doctor. There's a bit in the movie Mags, he's introduced as Dr. Pendanski, and he's like an actual counselor for like the whole camp, whereas in the book it's like it's a camp counselor, which just means he's in charge of the specific tent. Like presumably there is an equivalent for Pendanski for each of the other tents as well, but yeah, trying to the movie did make it way worse. So he's just oof.
Yeah. What's a Hippocratic oath?
Where are the adults?
Well, that actually that does lead into another topic that you and I have been talking about, Trina, when we were doing our prep, which was just like the role of adults in kids' books.
Yeah, no, even with like when you get into the upper grades books, adults don't usually exist to be characters that also develop. They are there to be, the antagonists. They're there to be the support roles. They're there to be, I don't know, inspirational. And I mean, we certainly see that in this one. The Stanley's parents try. They are nice people, but they're not really there. And everyone at camp is garbage. So, but like, at the very, very end, we get like a tiny bit of motivation for the warden, where it was like, as a kid, I had to dig holes every day, including holidays, and just like, this is why she's continuing the circle of abuse, I guess. But like, that's it. We don't know why Mr. Sir is there. We don't know why Mr. Pendanski is there. We don't know what kind of, job ad they put out to get people in this position. But Andrew Clements is like the one reliable exception I've found to that sort of adults aren't really here to change and be related to, but for the most part, Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I had another example of a kid's story where the adults were like fully developed characters, and I can't remember
Oh, you probably
what
did.
it was.
That was like last week. I don't remember weeks
Several days
anymore.
ago. But yeah, no, it is totally a trope. Adults are tropes. And they're there to either like make kids' lives harder actively or like not help at all. Um, which I don't know,
Oh,
in kids' books.
actually, you know what the prime example of that is? Series of unfortunate events. Either adults are clueless, they're evil and on Olaf's side,
Or
or
they're
they're
not
the
helpful.
one. They're the one. Well, every once in a while, you find the good, helpful adult, and they're going to die in 2 chapters.
Yeah, there was the one adult who grew in the wide window, like through her relationship
Right.
with the
It
kids,
was
she
it was
becomes a better
great.
person, and then she gets chucked out that wide window.
Well, and even like I think I
Sorry,
remember
spoiler
the
alert.
guy in the second book, the
Oh
reptile
yeah, yeah,
guy.
yeah.
He was great
Mhm.
too, and like the
He was great. Uncle
yeah.
Monty. Yeah, yeah.
But
Mojo feels tropey in this community as an adult.
like to an
Yeah.
extent, like it makes sense for plot purposes. Where like if you do in real life, kids hopefully aren't having to deal too much with like the big problems that you get in kids' books because they do have like some of these situations. It's like, well, if there was a reliable adult, chapter 1 is go to the reliable adult. Chapter 2 is it's done, or it's maybe not done, but it's close enough, and like the adult is going to handle it from here. Like, and the rest of the book will now just be normal elementary school problems.
But I mean, like, how powerful could that be, though, if kids like really did have, strong adults in the stories, kind of helping them grow and develop their morals? I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know if
no,
it's a
there's a way
trope
to
that
do
we
it. I
need.
think it's just, I don't know. It's probably I don't want to
Yeah,
say
but
lazy, but lazy
right.
writing.
Right, and at the same time, when adults like really aren't present for kids in their lives in these stories, it does give the kids lots of room. They have a lot of room to make their own mistakes and learn those lessons and process as they learn the lessons, so that the readers can also learn and grow.
Mojo's like, yeah, and how cell phones nowadays have to be lost or broken in very specific ways to advance narratives about kids being lost. Because yeah, that it's just like, oh, here's the safety net that you have in real life, but that doesn't actually lend us to writing a plot nowadays.
Yeah, and OC is saying from working in social services, is horrified of how both this camp was ever approved and how they just blatantly state that they can make zero disappear. It was not how the system works. No, but as far as kids understand, it could be. And so we've got a little bit of the willing suspension of disbelief. It is a story that does have like some manner of magic in it.
Right. Like it's mostly realistic fiction, but there is a certain level of exaggeration for certain parts.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we're talking about, well, theoretically, we're talking about the narrative. We haven't really been talking about it in a while. But I just kind of wanted to point out how much I love the way that this book is structured as you kind of like zoom in and out from the past to the present. And, legend gets kind of like folded into the story at just the right moment. So you can hear the stories from the past as they inform what's going on in the present. I don't know. I think it's just such a really nice use of the flashback or that sort of
No,
narrative
and it's
style.
I feel like the how when Sachar decides to like reveal certain things with the with the past, like just the timing of that is, after having watched the movie, I appreciate the book's timing a little bit more, because like in the book, we don't learn that, you know, the onions will protect the kids from the lizards until after they've already gotten out of the lizard hole, whereas in the movie, it's mentioned pretty early on.
Oh, no.
And so, like, you really
Lose all
shouldn't
the
be that
tension.
surprised that, like, no, of course they're not gonna die. Like...
Right. Yeah, no, there's so much narrative tension in that moment. Like, you are holding your breath and freezing still with the boys, wondering if they are truly about to die.
Yeah.
That's too bad. That's too bad. Yeah, and I know Mojo mentioned earlier that she didn't think that the like flashbacks and forth worked as well in the movie either. So that's something that I'll have to keep an eye out when I do get around to watching the movie.
Yeah. I mean, like, the first instance we get of the past chapters in the book is, like, a little sudden, but it's a book. Like, when you have nice, clean chapter breaks, I feel like it's a little easier to get away with that, rather than in a movie when, like, suddenly you're in the past and you're not sure why, or why this is going to be relevant. So that might be just something that works for one medium and not quite as much for another one.
Well, and that's like my whole soapbox about good adaptations is you've got to figure out how to make the new medium work for you.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily what I would expect from a Disney book adaptation in the early 2000s. So it is what it is.
It is.
Cool. Well, if we wanted to move on to like a general topic about relationships, I had a question for us and for chat about like the value that kids at Camp Green Lake place on their nicknames. And how do you guys think those nicknames inform their relationships with each other and with the adults around them?
I did see Mojo mentioned earlier up thread, she referred to Pendansky calling the kids by their, like, real life names as, like, almost sort of a dead naming, which is an interesting way to think about it. Like, you almost, like, two different identities, like, is almost what's going on, I think. Like, I know that multiple personality disorder has been grossly exaggerated by, like, media influences, but, like, you know, to the extent of, like, different personas, like, when you are in a really cruddy, abusive place like that, like, yeah, you probably are going to want to, like, have a safe way to disassociate it from the nice, more or less safe, normal life that you would like to get back to someday.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Mojo is also pointing out, and Hipster agreeing, that it's also a part of control. The boys have no control over their situation in the camp, but they do get to decide what they're called. And so, like, when Mom insists on referring to them by their real names, kind of like a dead name, like you were saying, it's kind of disrespecting them setting those boundaries for themselves.
Yeah, and, like, he in the book he specifically refers to them as the names that society will refer to them when they have, like, returned or something. It's like, okay, but society kind of already rejected them, so, like, why wouldn't they want to, you know, reinvent themselves to some extent? Like, okay, but you didn't like Stanley. You didn't want Stanley's society. Maybe Stanley doesn't want society either. We'll be this other person. Like, I'm sure there's some very interesting psychological stuff you could get into that I have not studied nearly enough to talk about, but...
Mm-hmm. Well, and, you know, if we consider this from, like, most of the narration that at least follows Stanley is from, like, a third person limited perspective. Like, we're getting Stanley's perspective on the story. He doesn't ever call himself Caveman. Like, maybe once or twice. He does
not. That is true.
In the story, but most of the time he's Stanley. It's it kind of seems like when he's, like, really identifying with like the role that he is in the camp and like identifying with his relationship with other boys. I think he calls himself caveman once or twice. It's towards like the part where he runs away, like leading up into it. I think he refers himself to it like that. But it's interesting that he didn't really kind of assume that identity within himself until that point.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I don't know if I had realized until you said that in the sequel, Small Steps, Armpit refers to himself as Armpit. Like, the name Theodore shows up, like, 4 times in this book, I think. Like, it's...
That is interesting.
And now I'm like, oh man, I need to... I just finished reading this, but now I need to read it again. Keeping that in the back of my head.
Yeah, and folks are pointing out in chat that at least Stanley's nickname, Caveman, was not something that he chose for himself. It was something that was put on to him. So I do think there is like a piece of kind of like wanting to be a part of the pack that also plays into these nicknames and relationships. Like the nicknames that they all have for themselves and each other, like very clearly, they don't just separate like their selves at camp and selves back in the rest of the world, but it also like separates them from the real world, but it also makes them a part of the same group.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, there's absolutely a camaraderie, like, acceptance aspect to it. Like, he, you know, that's when you know you're in. Like, the guys are gonna, you know, for as much as kids who are probably a little hardened by over a year of prison, basically, it can be, like, they're gonna have your back. Which, that's another thing that changes in the book. It takes, or from the movie, like, because Shia LaBeouf was not a big dude, they had to find a different way to work in the name Caveman, and so it happens, like, I think a week after he gets there, whereas this is just, like, day 2 or 3, I think. It felt like it. I'm just like... And then, you know, after, in the little section between Hector running away and Stanley running away, when Twitch shows up, like, he already has a name? I don't know. I think that timing is interesting. But.
Yeah. Just catching up with chat.
Okay, yeah, no, the Mr. Sir having a feminine name and whether that meant something or not was completely movie territory. That is not... We never learn Mr. Sir's real name in the book. So in the book, I always read that more as just like clearly Mr. Sir, based on his behavior, was the sort of person who liked having power trips over people who were not able to fight back. And, like, I just felt like Mr. Sir was another level on top of that. Like, what's the most, like, stupidly authoritarian name I can get them to call me? This one. Cool.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got the added dimension of Mr. Pendansky's nickname, Mom. So, like, that's very gendered in the other direction, which I think kind of continues to play on that kind of good cop, bad cop dynamic between the two of them.
But no, you'll see when you watch the movie, Mags. There's a bit at the end that, like, could be interpreted as, like, Mr. Sir is trans and they're trying to make fun of that, but we're really not sure where Disney was trying to go with it. So, yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, it was problematic for Mojo, which makes me think it'll be problematic for me as well. But it's okay. We can acknowledge problematic pieces in art and creation that we enjoy and still enjoy it. That's okay.
Yeah, but we can also be an extra level of, like, this thing wasn't in the book. Why did you add it in the first place?
I have big feels about that in the Game of Thrones series, but that's not appropriate for this channel.
This is a PG channel.
Find me after.
Mags After Dark. Going back to chat. we've had more people are showing up. Hi, we're here. We're talking about holes.
Hey. Yeah,
Hello,
welcome.
friends.
I guess we're nearly an hour in, so it could be a good moment to pause briefly and...
Station identification.
Station identification. Do you want to talk for a minute about, like, who we are as a team and what we do, Trina?
If I know for sure...
To put you on the spot?
Well, first off, which team name are we using at the moment?
Zeldathon team.
Okay, we are. don't. Of course. We're the Zeldathon team, and hi. We often normally do charity marathons. In the past, those have been in person. Obviously, the last year or so, we've had to do some virtual stuff instead. But yeah, we're just a big group of nerds that like playing games and having other people watch us play games and donate money to charity while we do it. In between events, we are trying to get together some more stuff for the community to do and hang out and chat about, and that's where this comes in. This is book club. This is our very first time doing it, and we read, or didn't, it's okay, Louis Sachar's Holes for this month, and we have been chatting about it and having a good time. So, yeah.
Yeah, so if you'd like to stay in touch with us between marathons, follow us on the social medias or join our Discord channel. We're also continuing the book club conversation in the Discord channel. So if you haven't gotten to the chance to read the book yet, but you do in the next few weeks and you get big feels about it and you want to talk about it, we'll be there for you. Come find us. I'm going to watch the movie in the next few days and I'm probably going to have big feels. So,
I cannot wait to, please, like,
can I, like,
live
tweet it into the Discord?
Yes.
Okay. Will do.
That is absolutely what I was going to suggest.
Oh, Mojo wants to watch with me. Yeah, we could even, like, do a voice watch. Although that would probably be less entertaining for everyone than the live tweets, so folks can come back to it too. Yes. Okay.
Oh boy.
All right, we'll make it all happen. We'll make our dreams
okay.
come true.
Also, I know we don't have any sort of like alerts turned on, but I do see that CW Grant subscribed to the channel. Thank you very much. That support, that money helps us develop the marathon and make them more cool, awesome events for you. So thank you.
Yeah, we're very excited to be here on this new Zeldathon channel because it gives us a great opportunity to grow the brand and, develop just like a little bit of revenue that will help us produce a better marathon for y'all in the future. So thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting and keep in touch so you can find out what more we're going to be doing. We love to spend the time with our community friends as well. So we're really, really excited to have a lot more community nights coming up. Brand, yes. Brand.
Branding. My brand.
My brand. Beautiful. All right. Well, are you ready to dig into some slightly heavier stuff, Trina?
I think I am. Here we go.
Cool. Here we go. So the next topic that we wanted to talk about, and we've touched on this a little bit already, but there's definitely a major theme throughout this story of the prison industrial complex and its impact on youth. So one question that I wanted to pose to chat and to us is what impact does incarceration have on kids in the story? And I think we've talked about it a little bit with the nickname stuff and the kind of like separation of identities. But if folks have any other thoughts about that, we'd love to hear it. And how does this the state of being incarcerated impact the way the kids construct their identities?
While Chad is processing that, Ilya mentioned the 5x5, and I forgot that I did the math, and I'm going to share the math because hard to say how much is realistic and how much is exaggerated for the purpose of narrative, but in case you were wondering how much effort it would in fact take to dig a 5-foot deep and 5 diameter hole, the volume of dirt involved would be just short of 100 cubic feet. And according to Google, a cubic yard of dry dirt, which I think we can presume that Green Lake is dry dirt, weighs a ton. And given that a 1 cubic yard is equal to 27 cubic feet. That means that the dirt from each hole weighs just over 7,000 pounds, or 3,000 kilograms. And that's disregarding however much extra effort it took to, like, get through that initial crust. And they're doing that every day, once a day, for just over a year for most of these kids. So, yeah.
No wonder Stanley didn't want to move that pile of dirt.
Child labor.
Yeah, and some folks are pointing out Ilya is still concerned how Zero ended up at camp for shoplifting. I sadly feel like that's a part of the story that did not feel as outlandish to me as other parts, especially knowing how few resources Hector had to his name before he wound up at Camp Green Lake. It's only towards the very end of the story that we start to hear more from Hector, and he starts to use his voice more to tell Stanley some stories from his childhood. But it may or may not have been his first run-in with the state, and the state of the prison industrial complex is not kind to Black boys in particular, and Black men, and especially Black males wind up disproportionately punished for the same crimes or lesser crimes than their white counterparts do. And that is an unfortunate reality of how things are here in America. And it's not okay, and it really sucks. But that was a part of the story that actually felt more true to me than some of the others.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason that, like, most of the other kids, we don't find out what put them in the prison, because that's, like, I don't think that there is really you could justify that sort of child labor punishment for, like, any crime, really. Like, that's not, these kids are, like, in middle school, maybe? That's always the vibe I got. Like, I don't think they're even high schoolers. And, like, you're doing more physical labor than, like, grown people who get paid for it do.
Yeah. And I mean, we could like really dig in and talk about how prison labor is slave labor. I mean, across the country, incarcerated people are forced into jobs that they get paid like cents per hour to complete. And if they have to use any of that money in order to get like basic care supplies from their commissary.
Right. Here's your bar of soap that costs $10.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And there's just no way for them to get any sort of compensation that they can actually like save up, so that when they leave the incarceration system, they can actually get themselves back on their feet as functioning members of society. And it's another way that the cycle perpetuates itself. And so the fact that this prison labor is such a really important, like it's the name of the book. Those holes, they're digging holes because they have to. I don't know. I think it really strongly roots this story in the sort of injustice that exists in the justice system. Which makes me like really feel like the kind of glossing over of racial differences in the movie that y'all are talking about, like, does the story a real disservice.
Yeah. And I mean, even like aside from the racial stuff, this stuff that the kids go through in the movie is almost given more of like a humor, like, you know, okay, Holes has its like sort of dry sense of humor, like with what's going on, but it's almost feels more like a slapstick flavor. Like, it's not straight up slapstick, but it's just like, you have other kids' movies where it's just like, this kid has to go through this ridiculous thing, and like it just strips the tone of the movie feels like it strips the like seriousness of the situation out of it, rather than like complementing the seriousness of it with, this is the humor we're going to need to survive this. So yeah, no, the movie, yeah. The more we talk, the worse the movie sounds. It's okay in a tunnel. Shia LaBeouf is a fun kid, but
Mojo's going off in chat. Thank you, Mojo.
Yeah,
I appreciate all of the points that you were pointing out, for sure.
Yeah,
I know. I have thoughts too, and big feelings. So thank you for sharing. So there's also a piece that directly relates into what's called the troubled teen industry. And Trina, I know that you have a lot to say about this.
I mean, not like a lot, but
you have things
yeah,
to
no.
say.
So when me and Mags were like discussing planning this, and it was just like, oh, we gotta read the book again. I should probably watch the movie. And I'm like, oh yeah, and I need to get around to watching the Paris Hilton documentary. And very naturally, Mags, you were like, what? This is a strange non sequitur. But yeah, no, they're not usually like, they're more set up as schools than camps, but there are like juvenile facilities basically that presume to, we will have these children work to make them better. And actually, Paris Hilton went to several of these as a teen. And if you watch the documentary, it's on YouTube. It's just called This Is Paris. Like, it's an hour 45, and from like hour 1:10 on is just like her at these places. And like, she meets up with other survivors from the places and they use the term survivors because they do come out of it with like PTSD and the inability to trust anyone and anxiety and like a whole list of things. And like, this is not as unrealistic as we would like it to be in some ways. Like, they weren't digging holes specifically, but like, there was solitary confinement involved. There was various types of abuse. And yeah, so like, when this documentary came out, like, there was a protest outside of the one, like, the last school that she was at, which is the one that she felt was the worst. It was called Provo Canyon School. If you Google it, you can find stuff on it. But yeah, just like, people are starting to speak up about like, this is the stuff that happened to me as a kid under the guise of like rehabilitation, and it wasn't okay. And there are still kids at these schools, and they will be all like, we're under different leadership now, we don't do that. And like, but do we really have a way that we're keeping them accountable? So it's a rabbit hole that I have just started to dip my foot into. But yeah, no, it's wonky. It's wild.
Right, and it is an industry. These are actually like privately run places that parents like pay to send their kids to when they think they're out of options, or they think that they are incapable of reforming whatever problem behavior they think their teens are exhibiting. And the actual like incarceral element here in this story adds like a totally different layer, because like, these families don't have that choice. It's terrible that some adults make these choices to send their kids to those places, and they hopefully, like, giving them the benefit of the doubt, they don't actually understand what all goes on there, because they have been misconstrued in the marketing to them. But like, even if we were talking a little bit before about like writing from home, like, why don't the adults do something about it? Like, if kids are there because of a court order, like, they may not feel like they have a choice, or that there is anything that they can do.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of work trying to push against an ingrained system. Like, that's something you end up needing momentum for that, and that's really hard for one person to build up. And the fact that we do have, social media is crap for many things, but, like, that is one of the things that we have seen come out of this, that, like, you know, you are able to build momentum in some of these movements and spread awareness to a bigger scale to where you can start getting the manpower on your side to be like, hey, no, we need to change something. This isn't okay.
Yeah. And I also think one of the least true to me feeling pieces of the story was when Stanley's dad's patent lawyer was able to get his
name cleared. I forgot that's what she was there for.
Right.
Those are two very completely different parts of law, it's true.
Right, and it is not quite believable to me that she herself would be able to, like, obviously she's a really, like, smart and passionate person, and that is what it would take to actually fight against the system and get a judgment overturned. But also, like, she doesn't necessarily have the knowledge that would be requisite to do so, because they're, like, one of the major barriers in navigating the justice system is just knowledge. You know, folks who don't have access to lawyers, like Stanley's family in the first place, they don't understand how the law works, and the law is like a very carefully calculated, constructed game. And if you don't have the ability to hire a lawyer who specializes and you try to defend yourself, or if you're provided a public defender who hopefully is committed but to the work that they're doing, but might be just, like, stretched too thin to be able to apply the appropriate amount of time and effort into fighting and defending a case, you know, you're going to go under if you don't have those resources available to you.
Yeah. Hipster says that Miss Marengo is his hero. I have an actual line in my notes that just says, "Please be my friend, Miss Marengo." There are some people doing good work.
Yeah, it's possible she wanted to practice a different part of law, but just ended up in her current job. True. Although, I don't know, man. If you wanted to work in criminal defense and wound up in patents, something has gone wrong.
I mean, I could feel like if you were there for a while and you just kind of got burnt out on, like, the world is really crappy, I'm going to go hide under some paperwork.
True, it does take an exceptional amount of emotional labor to perform that kind of job. Yeah, just catching up on chat.
How was this camp approved? How many visits did someone of the state make?
Right.
How much money was passed to let them approve it?
These are thoughts that I was thinking too. Like,
I feel like the judge had to be in on this, right? Like,
there had to be. Like, this is the warden's family land, and she just happened to build a prison labor camp on top of it. Like, what?
Kickbacks are illegal.
Privatization of incarceration is always a bad thing.
Many things should not be businesses. That is one of them. Schools are another. Funny how the two sort of that whole pipeline thing, you know. Can't imagine how that's related. Do we want to touch on our other big heavy topic?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've already talked about it quite a bit.
We have more or less talked about the race stuff, but
yeah, so the next topic that we had in mind was race, and what impact does race have in the narrative? Is it important that half the kids in the camp here are Black and half are white? At least in the small group that we get to know. And I'm not sure where we'd land on that specific question.
Yeah, I would say I feel like it reflects the, you know, probably ethnic makeup of the actual prison system, except, I don't know, maybe there's too much white. I don't know. I've never done the actual, like, statistics. I just know that disproportionately people of color.
Right. Yeah, and OC and Ilya are saying that they don't see the point of race to the story. And I think that may just be because it didn't go much further, but it also kind of, I don't know, it makes me think about how in a lot of literature, especially people who are white, we read whiteness as the default. And I know that I have definitely experienced this a lot in my life. If I'm reading a story, I do have the tendency to assume that characters are white and that they look like me, unless it is explicitly stated in the text. And so I do feel like there is definitely space in books to, confront, or not confront, but even like describe the characters who are in the story so that they are able to have their own identities, because especially here in America, race does play a difference in who you are and how you are perceived. And so, like, can you really understand the full experience of a character that you're reading about unless you also understand their racial identity?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is hard to tell, like, for someone who is not of color, and especially with these earlier books, I think it is harder to tell when a character's race being identified is like actual efforts at representation and when it's tokenism. Because like when do, like Chad is acknowledging that like in the past story with Kate and Sam that like the race stuff being addressed absolutely makes sense. But like other than the optics of the digging the hole, did it contribute to the modern day stuff? And I know that some of the people in chat right now are people of color, and I'm going to just read their stuff for a second. But yeah, it's, I mean, again, this was the 90s. This was the height of the colorblind approach to looking at people. And yeah, I mean, I guess like,
yeah, so it was like almost novel that the book even did explicitly call out race in any way, shape, or form. It's very unusual. And Hermione was sharing that she does also experience that whiteness as default. She reads characters as white unless it's otherwise defined. And that definitely speaks to, the dominance of whiteness in our culture, that even those same things get projected onto our Black friends and other people of color.
right. Mojo is, hold on, it's spread out because Twitch chat.
Hey Jiggy, what's up?
Oh no, it's Jiggy.
Welcome to the Nerd Den.
Mojo is saying that all the named staff are white. Because we only know the three, but that having like the colored characters or the characters of color like actually being named characters is at least a little bit of a good thing. Like, they're not the background characters, at least. Like, they're clearly our main two characters in this story are Stanley and Zero / Hector. But, you certainly like X-Ray is definitely one of the characters that is like a force in this book. And like honestly, it's Squid was one of the white characters, and the only thing I can remember to tell you about Squid is that I think he's the one that's crying on his bunk one night that Stanley happens to notice. And that's it.
About that. Yeah.
And then Zigzag is the one that like attacks them, but like you get more personality out of the non-white characters, I think, which is a little interesting. But Mojo couldn't even remember Squid's name. That's how non-existent Squid is.
Yeah, Mojo, I laughed when you were naming the 7 doors. The last door.
It's always a problem.
Yeah. And Jiggy, I just want to say, we talked about this a little bit earlier before you came in, but even if you didn't read the book, we're glad that folks are here, and there's lots of very valid ways to engage with stories. So welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Yes. Oh, actually, you know what's funny? Sorry, you haven't read the movie. Someone was mentioning, like,
I have
at
not
the
read
end...
the movie.
Shush! Someone was mentioning, like, we were talking about, like, Armpit versus Theodore at the end, and they were like, you know, at the end of the movie, Armpit comes up and he's like, tell my mom Theodore said sorry. It's not Armpit and Theodore in the book, it's Squid! Squid is supposed to be the one who's like, tell my mom I'm sorry. They actually, like, that got reassigned. I did not remember that.
Huh. We will talk about Shia LaBeouf in holes soon. There was a couple other good points I wanted to call back to that chat brought up. And yeah, CWA Grant pointed out that Stanley being white makes it easier for privileged people who are engaging with the story to take a look at a flawed justice system. And I definitely think that that is definitely something that we see reflected in literature a lot, you know. Kind of, we white folks, we can be a little fragile sometimes, and it can be easier for us to engage with stories that make us uncomfortable if we're viewing them through a lens that's easier for us to relate to, because it speaks more to our experiences. And then Ilya was pointing out that in Small Steps, the fact that Armpit and X-Ray are Black play a huge part in the story, and that couldn't have happened without them being acknowledged as Black in the first place. But she just felt like the way that like their race was introduced felt uncomfy. And I do kind of see it because, you know, it was introduced as like racial groups. You know,
it was a list. Like it wasn't
a characterization of each of the boys. It was there were 3 Black, there were 3 white, and there was a Hispanic boy as well. Yeah,
it is a very impersonal sort of way of introducing that. That is true. But yeah, no, absolutely. People who have not read Small Steps, you should read Small Steps. It's a good follow-up, and it does very much get more into the, because, you know, here we're in prison, more or less, and it's sometimes after you've gotten out that the hard stuff is like,
yeah. And a Black Sparrow, Sherrick was also sharing that he was in the show. He shared this with me the other night. He played Sam. He was in a play of Holes a while ago. There is apparently a play, and Sherrick was in it. Awesome. But when he was in it, there were only a few boys that were Black in the show, which is really interesting and probably like a whole side conversation that we could have about theater and casting and race. And, you know, there have been like really notable examples recently with like Hamilton taking a story that we know, centering entirely on white people and only casting people of color in the role. There's also like the race bending of Hermione in the play production of Cursed Child, which is awesome. And it was actually there was a girl I went to college with who does all kinds of media writing, and she's amazing. Her name is Alana Bennett. If you don't follow her on Twitter, you should, because she's very smart and she writes for Roswell now. But she wrote an article on BuzzFeed way back in the day, like long before Cursed Child, that talked about a race-bent Hermione and how important the idea of Hermione being Black was to her growing up. And it includes like really cool fan art of Hermione's bushy hair being, you know, something that she's interacting with and struggling to control. And how like being able to kind of engage with the character who I think she pointed out is never actually explicitly described as white in the text. So it's like totally possible that Hermione is Black. But like having that opportunity to imagine her favorite character looking like her really meant a lot to her growing up. But there's definitely a lot of interaction that can be done on the stage with this kind of race bending.
Hermione in chat is being very excited right now.
Yes, and our lovely Black Hermione here with us is totally canon in the story. We love you, Hermione. Okay, I lost track because I accidentally rolled back.
We haven't hit on the idea of reparations yet, and how we sort of get a little bit of that in this book, because, you know, whether he intended to or not, Elia made a promise he did not keep, and the Yellnuts family knew them for that, and guess who gave half the money to their Zeroni family after their curse got broken? Not that that's, like, I mean, there's like, non-monetary reparations in the book, too, I feel like. Like, I mean, the whole just fulfilling the original request can be seen as a form of reparations. Magic reparations, yes, but it was just like they were magic, though.
Do you mean they were, like, magical, like they made the story and its meaning come alive to you? Or do you
that would make more sense.
literally the magic of Stanley carrying up the hill. The dynamic of seeing Zero as Hector, yes, and befriending him. No, you mean they were fantastical. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think there's room for both.
Yeah.
In the narrative.
This whole time we were discussing, it's just like, do I call him Zero or do I call him Hector? Because his name is Hector, but he's referred to as Zero in most of the book, but that's not his name. But yeah, it's, you see, I'm trying to remember how much, like, the actual, I'm almost surprised that the text does not switch to calling him Hector, like, further on, because, like, clearly by the time we've been up the mountain, like, Stanley, he's not a Zero to Stanley.
Right, and Hector's become comfortable enough with Stanley to begin to, like, share himself and his experiences with him. And so he does become, you know, his own person and not just a Zero in Stanley's eyes.
He does say, "I'm not leaving without Hector," when the lawyer comes.
Yeah, and Hermione's pointing out that it is magical because of the curse that is broken and the cycle of poverty ending, which does really highlight something that was really interesting to me, that it seems to be clear, like, I don't think it's explicitly stated, but the curse that follows the Yellnuts family around was actually not just limited to them. It seemed to have also impacted the Zeroni family. Like the breaking of the trust between Elia and Madame Zeroni rippled forward in time, not just for Elia's descendants, but hers as well.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, obviously we don't, but, like, it'd be interesting to see what the various generations of the Zeroni family, like, experienced after that point. Like, we knew, because I think Madame Zeroni said her son had already gone to America, so, like, he was over there already. But, like, you know, between him and then Hector's mom, like, you know, how... Hector does mention that they weren't always homeless. So, like, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. It's too. We've been talking for an hour and a half, and my brain is starting to shut down.
We have been, and that's okay, because it's actually taking us towards the end of the time that we had set aside for whole specific discussion. The last topic that we had on it, we have also covered quite a bit, but the film adaptation. We've been talking about this a lot as we've worked our way through the rest of the conversation, especially since it seems like a lot of folks who are here with us today have engaged with the story in different ways. Like maybe the film was the first introduction to the story of Whole, so it necessarily like impacts how they read the book, and vice versa. When you read the book first, it changes the way that you view the movie. So we've been kind of in conversation around that. But there's kind of like a general question that I wanted to pose to everyone, which is how was the story adapted to fit the new medium of film, and does it work? And what gets lost in translation? What do you guys think?
I would say. I mean, obviously, you haven't watched it. I think I've mostly said my thoughts on it. Like, the actual story beats are all there. Like, if someone just, like, wrote out a couple paragraphs that described the plot of Holes and then compared it to the movie, they'd be like, yep, they got it. But it's just a lot of, like, tonal things that just, like, they'll make small changes, and then that cumulatively affected the tone of the movie. Like, if you watch it in a vacuum, or, you know, just not having read the book, you're like, yeah, this is a fun movie, because, like, people seem to like the movie growing up. But, yeah. I don't know that, like, visually, I'm not a huge cinematography person, so I don't know if there was, like, any, like, visual stuff that I'm like, man, that was a weird choice to make. But, let's see what Chad is thinking.
Yeah, Mojo said the script was quite faithful because Sachar worked on it. There would have been a love interest without Sachar keeping the story the way it was.
Yeah, no, we can blame the directors, I think.
Love a good forced love interest in a kid's story. Hipster thinks that the direness of Stanley and Hector's situation when they were running away was completely lost. That's interesting.
Yeah, like, I mean, they, you know, the adults, like, we see conversations with the trio of adults that, like, sort of implies, like, we wait a couple days and then send the search party, and then they'll already be dead. But, like, I don't know, when you finally run across Hector, like, it doesn't feel like he's on the verge of death. Like, you find him here, and it's just, like, he is about to die, and just, like, the whole trip up the mountain, you're like, you're about to die, it's about to die. About to die. Whereas, I don't know, it feels just more like adventure-y running away from home in the movie. There was also so much water at the top of the mountain. You didn't have to dig for it.
Yeah, and Mojo pointing out, she did mention earlier that the connections between 1900 and 2000 were a lot harder to parse out in the movie, which makes me so sad because that's one of the most effective narrative elements to me in the story as written. But when we're talking about adaptations, you know, you have to work within the constraints of your format. And so I think when you use flashbacks in film, you have less of an opportunity to explicitly state why you're doing so. Like in the book, it's very clear that you're getting this story from 100 years ago because it is absolutely informing something.
You don't have the benefit of a narrator.
Right. You don't have the benefit of a narrator. And like having that narrator can help you like layer the stories on top of each other. I'm on push to talk now, which makes me really sad because I want to use two hands at once to like show how like 1900 kind of in the book like lies flat on top of 2000, and especially in the way that some of the elements of the story connect to each other. But like in a film, you're pretty much stuck in that like forward narrative momentum. And so if you're gonna pull back from that momentum, there's got to be a better way to like ease that transition to make the connection clearer, if that makes sense.
The Deluge Warden is saying that the relationship between Stanley and the other campers is a lot more positive in the movie. Yeah, I think, like, in the book, you get, like, definitely more of a feel of these kids have been, like, hardened by being in prison, and, like, you know, they'll only get so close to you, whereas the movie is much more of, like, we kind of almost are maybe at camp, like, we're becoming friends, like, I don't even know if there's, like, context to the scene. I'm picturing, like, there's a point where, like, a group of them are coming out of, like, the dining hall, and Stanley's there, and, like, him and, like, Armpit are, like, almost getting into this, like, dance-off or something. I don't know. It was weird. Having your prison buddies over for a swim party.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of feel like a missed opportunity in the book that, you know, like, we get the tribalism of the nicknames, but otherwise, we actually don't really see that sort of, you know, camaraderie play out. Like, mostly you just kind of jump into, like, Zigzag's got issues. You know, like the other boys just still feel kind of scary, and I don't know which way would necessarily be better or more true to the experience of Stanley.
Yeah, I don't
You know,
know how
maybe
much is supposed to be, like, scary versus just, like, they can't fully trust anyone. Like,
yeah,
they, you know, they presumably have parents that were like, no, we're sending you off, so they can't apparently trust their parents to make the best decisions for them, and they certainly can't trust the adults at the camp, and just, yeah, like, there's, I think they just don't want to open up very much.
yeah.
But you can't, that doesn't make a good Disney movie vibe. We need a fun Disney movie.
Right. Oh, Inka's asking an interesting question. Stanley wasn't fat in the movie. Do you feel like this mattered to the story or not? It's complicated, you know?
Right. I feel like the biggest effect we had from Stanley being fat in the book was, like, the lack of friends. Not that fat people can't have friends, but, like, kind of that whole, like, you know, he was being bullied. His size was probably a big part of that. Like, in the movie, we get, like, here's just this kid. Oops, he's sent off, and we don't get the backstory of, like, he didn't have anyone. Like, he had his family, but, like, he didn't have any friends. Also, it meant they had to do this whole, like, workaround to try to get to his nickname. That was a little silly. But, yeah, I don't...
Yeah.
Hard to say.
And I remember in the Discord, someone, I think it was Ilya maybe, pointed out, like, oh, I forgot that Stanley being fat was a character trait.
Right, because you picture Shia LaBeouf if you've seen the movie, and he a small boy.
Right, and I couldn't quite tell if that was a negative read or not, from that perspective, because, you know, it is important for representation, that we do read stories where characters are fat, and I think that, especially from, like, a place of folks who are really concerned about body positivity, there's probably, like, a more thoughtful way to approach that character trait than we really do see in the books, but I also don't think it was necessarily, like, a negative on him. You know, it wasn't painted...
It was more the way people around him seemed to treat him because of it. That was just like, this is a bad thing. Like,
right. And I think it's really interesting and also kind of positive that it doesn't, like, define him to himself either. You know, like, he's much more strongly defined by the, like, constant victimhood of the no good, dirty, rotten, pig stealing grandfather, great grandfather, and so I do think that, like, that kind of representation is really important. Just like how it's important to have, you know, kids of color and Black kids just being kids in stories, it's also important to have fat kids just being kids and not have it be, like, the main point of the story. So like in order to think about the difference with the movie, had to kind of like interact with like how it plays out in the book a little bit, and it's something that we hadn't talked about yet. And so then the question is like, what do we potentially lose? And I think you've addressed it already a little bit, Trina. But I'm gonna glance through chat now and see if folks have other thoughts.
Yeah, Hipster mentioned a bit earlier that he thought maybe it was meant to build parallels with Elia getting stronger physically from carrying the peg. But also, like, because he was so big, like, people would assume, you assume the big kid is the bully, and, like, the kid who did pick on him was small, and, like, no one believed that it's like, oh, you're not being picked on, you could take that kid. And, like, just that playing into, like, I just want to live my life, dude.
Yeah, definitely. It for sure plays against those tropes, and yeah, it's illuminating. So when you lose that, it's definitely something lost.
Right. Oh, maybe that is why Pendanski was like, why don't you hit him?
Yeah.
That line did not, I mean, Pendanski, many things about Pendanski don't make sense to me now, as I mentioned. But yeah, that was one of the notes I made. I'm like, why would you are at a essentially juvie complex. Why are you encouraging one kid to hit another? This seems like a really bad idea.
Bruh, I just want to chill. Yeah, for sure. All right. So that concludes like most of the discussion that we had planned around holes. Thank you so much for everyone for engaging with this and bringing so many really interesting thoughts and perspectives. Really appreciate y'all all being here today for this conversation. We are here until 4, so we have a couple of extra segments planned.
First off, I mean, this is book club. There are lots of books out there. We want to know what you guys have been reading recently, or if not recently, then like what are some of the other favorites that you've been into? Because in the past, more books are good. Max, what have you been reading recently?
I've been reading Holes by Louis Sachar.
Okay, what was the last thing you read before that?
Let's see. We've been doing this year a lot of listening our way back through a lot of our favorite stories. So we started
Comfort food.
When we were in New Zealand in March. We listened to all of the Lord of the Rings movies. It was magical. Yes. And that kind of set us off. We listened to The Hobbit again. We listened our way through Harry Potter, and then all of that stuff through J.K. Rowling came down as we were in like book 5, and I've just experienced a lot of feelings about all of that that we can interact with later. And now we're on the Game of Thrones series, which again, can't really dig into here in this channel, but I have lots of feelings about. Happy to talk about them anytime.
Do you have feelings about when the next book comes out?
You know what? I actually try not to have feelings about it because I don't want to set myself up for expectations to potentially be disappointed, which much of the fandom has been experiencing for a really long time. You know, I would rather, not anticipate it and just be super pleasantly surprised and really stoked whenever we finally get around to it. I do think it's fat phobic and ageist when people talk about how they don't know how long GRM is going to be around. I think that we don't know anything about his health or what's going on, so it's not really a cool way to engage in that conversation.
I don't know how much of that is like within the fantasy community having experienced the same thing from Robert Jordan not being able to finish Wheel of Time by himself. So I don't know how much is like Martin specifically and just like I did this with one author, I don't want to do another. But yeah, no, I'm sure there's definitely aspects of that from people.
I haven't heard anybody speculating that Pat Rothfuss is going to die before he finishes his books, that he's also taken a really long time to get the next book out on.
I kind of assumed people didn't think he was working on it anymore. But I don't know. There are lots of other books that are currently still being written and published. We're not going to get into Rothfuss right now. That's a whole chat.
Anyway, so I will be very excited whenever we finally hear something about Minds of Winter.
Okay. Gosh, I had my list of things I have been reading and I forgot. I read the first of the Kyoshi novels from the Avatar universe.
Cool.
Many of you I know have watched Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you didn't know, there's the comics that actually follow our friends, original friends, in the years to come. But yeah, they've started writing some upper elementary / YA sort of on the boundary novels about Kyoshi's time, and book 1 was a really fun read, and I need to put book 2 on hold. Would recommend. The first book is called The Rise of Kyoshi, and then the second one is The Shadow of Kyoshi. So those are fun reads if you have read Avatar. And then what was the other thing?
How do you feel like the story in the universe translates from television to the page?
I think this particular author did a really good job with it. I'm just going to say they, because I don't know if I actually know what gender they are. But there's some locations that you'll recognize from the show, but then there's also some new locations, because, guess what? We didn't see the entirety of the Avatar world, and it's just this really nice combination of, okay, here's the callbacks, but also here's the bits of the world that you didn't get to see, and some of the different people, yes, we saw the 4 nations in a way, but not guess what? Not everyone in one country is exactly alike. And also, even if you haven't watched the show, it is written so that you can still get into it, which is always just a good approach to take in general with adaptations. Yeah, I would recommend. Yeah, chat, what have you been reading? I think some people already mentioned stuff.
Bye, Hermione. Thanks for hanging out with us today.
Bye, Hermione. See, but hipster, by waiting this long to finish Peace Talks, you now have Battlegrounds already out, I'm pretty sure, so you don't have to deal with I only really read half of a book, and now I have to wait on a hanging point. The Cruel Prince. I need to Google this. Tell us about this Cruel Prince book, Ilya. As I start trying to type Ilya into my Google search. That won't work. Oh, it's Holly Black. I've always wanted to try Holly Black stuff, but
the covers of her books look so cool.
I just missed the fairy heavy part of my life, I think. I found them just after, and I was like, oh, I might still be interested, and then I forgot.
Yeah. I've seen them in my libraries, and they look awesome.
Phil's read a vampire novel. I just like the title, Carrion Comfort, already. That sounds fascinating. Dino's been reading the XKCD books.
Oh, nice. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it, so thank you for contextualizing that for me.
Percy Jackson.
Yeah. Huge amount of nostalgia. It's a good time for nostalgia right now. Are
they doing the series?
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Are we going to rescue another thing from the poor pile of bad movie adaptations that...
Oh, that's right. There was one, wasn't there?
I mean, technically, I think they did the second book too, but it was just, they just got worse, and then no one wanted to watch them anymore. Can't imagine why.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a series that needs to be a television series, not just movies.
Yeah.
Too much to get lost.
OC has been working on Dark Tower and is going to do Earthsea next. Earthsea is definitely on my list.
I have not read any Le Guin before, and it is a shame
I think
on my house.
Le Guin is the one that wrote Catwings, right? Like, I think I read a single Catwings book. But
all I know is that she's majorly influential on fantasy as a whole.
Betsy pops in. I loved Catwings.
That tracks.
would never have guessed.
One Day at Horrorland, really good book. I have not heard of that. It sounds kind of like a Goosebumps.
I was about to say that.
But they're really good, so.
Oh wait, it is!
Goosebumps number 6.
It is! Haha!
Cool. Very good. Yeah, they're great books. I got banned from reading them for a while because they gave me such bad nightmares.
I didn't read them because the covers looked too gross for me. Like, I don't think I was, objectionably, I'm not reading horror books. They just didn't, I don't know. I didn't like the aesthetic of the covers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the covers themselves that were giving me the nightmares.
I'm like, I'll read Animorphs, about this terrible war on middle schoolers effect. But,
The only books Inca has at home are the John Green books because they make her cry and she likes that. That's how I feel about This Is Us. It's my recreational cry time. Sometimes you just need something to get the juices flowing for the catharsis.
I need to cry, and I need a good excuse to do it. Books. Yes, the first graphic novel for Animorphs is out, and I put it... Actually, I don't remember if I got to put it on hold at work. I think it was still in processing. It wasn't early enough, but...
Animorphs have summoned Liz to the chat. Yeah, I really need to read it, too. It sounds so good. I love the Animorphs. And I'm so happy that they're kind of getting a little bit of a revival, because I have seen some great Twitter threads pointing out how what a Banff KA Applegate is just in general, pointing out maybe I think it was in comparison to the Harry Potter series and how everything works out in the end and we work together, and Kay Applegate is just war is hell.
People die.
True. Catherine loves This Is Us and is already crying. Thank you, Kath. I feel seen. Smoople calling us out for literally judging a book by
okay, when I was 9.
It's a thing and it happens, so we just need to acknowledge it. Black Sparrow did a podcast on the first 2 books. Cool.
Wait, if you want to drop a link in chat, we'll let you.
Do a promo.
You have permission.
Yes. I love it, Sherrick. And then we've also been kind of expanding the conversation recently beyond just books to good stories that you're engaging with. The Zeldathon Discord was recently talking about Fire Emblem, which made me remember that Fire Emblem 3 Houses is a game that I would die for. I love it so much. And so I hopped back into it last night and was playing some and was just reminded of the magic and mystery, and was helping to introduce it to some friends who were hanging out in chat, and was just talking about how impactful that narrative was on me the first time I played it through. It is so deeply emotional. And so poignant and raises so many good questions, that if anybody wants to do a book club conversation around Fire Emblem 3 Houses, hit me up.
I would have to play them first. I want to get into I need to watch playthroughs because the gameplay, I would just never be able to let anyone die. I would just feel too bad, and therefore I would never finish the game. So I just need to watch someone else play the game.
You can turn off that mode in 3 Houses. It's not
that's
mandatory.
Good. Ooh,
yes.
Okay.
I did that on my first run through because I'd never played it before and was like, I need help.
Okay. Smoople says, I'd come to that book club.
Beautiful Smoople. You and me, waxing poetic about 3 Houses. Oh, I did side against Edelgard. It was a hard choice to make, but it felt like the true choice to myself and my character. And my husband made the other choice. So I got to watch it play out through his perspective, and we had some really interesting conversations about that.
Do people not? I was under the impression you had to like play through 3 times, one time each as like one of the houses. Is that not how that works?
It is.
Okay.
There is one specific house that you play through where you have to make a choice.
Okay, so
half,
it's
2/3 of the way through the story, and then that forks off into 2 very different stories.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are running low on time. We were gonna do this we were gonna do this whole speech about like stuff available through libraries.
You're gonna proselytize to you.
So I'm gonna try to trim this down so we can actually fit in most of our wrap up stuff.
Cool.
If you have access to a public library, at least in the States, do you know if these are used in other countries, Mags? Because I've never bothered looking into it, but probably.
I think so.
The most commonly used 2 apps that will be available from your public library, if your public library does ebooks or any sort, are Libby, or it used to be Overdrive, it's still the name of the company, they have a new app, it's called Libby, or Hoopla. And from the patron end, they are not that different. They're a little more different from the library end. Libby/Overdrive, your library actually like buys the licenses for stuff ahead of time, and then they have that book for either usually a year or like 52, 26 checkouts, like whichever comes first. Whereas Hoopla has this like big universal catalog that all libraries have access to if they've signed up, and then the library pays per use. So usually your library will limit you to like 10, 15 checkouts on Hoopla per month, whereas Libby is just like, you can have 5 books just at a time, but no specific limit for the month. And tell them why that might be important to them, Mags.
That would be important because, let's see, say you're looking for a book, or you want to find a book to read right now. With Overdrive, you may or may not be able to find something available that you do want to read, but with Hoopla, everything that's in their catalog is always available to you, which is super cool. I personally don't find as much in the Hoopla catalog that to interest me as in the Overdrive/Libby catalog, and like the libraries that I have cards with, I've got a few of them, I've moved around. They've got pretty decent availability in Libby, so I can usually find at least something that I'm interested in reading and downloading immediately. I really love using ebooks, and like, don't get me wrong, I am 100% on the band of print books forever, but ebooks are really nice if you're living in a pandemic and you are nervous about going into a public space or borrowing a material that someone else has checked out recently, even though libraries are taking lots of precautions to quarantine our materials. Ebooks are safe. 100%. You're not getting any viruses through your ebooks. Or if you're about to go on vacation, a little less likely these days. But when I have gone on vacation in the past, I really like to like go in and just find a few books that I can download to my tablet, and then I've always got a book ready to go with me. Find a lot of different things, find some good beach reads, and then I don't have to pack like 3 giant tomes in my suitcase.
Or worry about leaving it at the hotel.
Or worry about leaving it at the hotel. So the neat thing about Hoopla is that they have a actually pretty great comic book collection, and they've got a really nice like native comic book reader in their app. So you can actually move through a comic book or a graphic novel panel by panel, which is something that I really enjoy when I feel like reading something like that through Hoopla.
Yeah.
And that's my super short spiel about Libby and Hoopla.
Yes, but if you do check if your library has Hoopla, because that may be helpful for you for next month's read. Because it's only the audiobook for some reason, but it is available at least. Next month, we will be reading The Birchbark House by Louise Erdrich. I think that's how you say her name. But yeah, this is a little bit older, so it might, do check if your public library has a physical copy. If they do, put it on hold. But if not, you can probably get it on Hoopla. Just to give you, a little tiny bit of summary thing. This takes place roughly in the same, westward expansion U.S. time period as, say, Little House on the Prairie. But it is written about a Native American nation. In fact, the author herself is from that nation. We call that own voices in the library world, where the group, it's an author writing about a group that they belong to, a minority group. And that makes usually for a more authentic experience. So we thought with Thanksgiving coming up that might be a good fit. So it is mirrored. Aw, I was hoping mine was wrong on my end, but okay. We can type it out in chat just to make sure.
I got
but
you.
It'll be posted. Okay, no, you did. Okay.
Yep. And then our next discussion will be November 21st at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And we will be here on the Zeldathon channel. So if you haven't, hit that button down over there. Give us a follow so you can stay tuned when we go live.
But yeah, keep an eye out for, future events, community events that will be happening. Keep an eye on the Discord, keep an eye on Twitter, and we will let you guys know what we are doing. I am going to check if any team members are streaming for a raid. We said we were gonna.
and Dread are still streaming, so we could hop in on them. Shadow's also streaming. The mirroring is making things fall apart.
Oh no.
Get over it. Is Zeldathon not on the Zeldathon Twitch team?
Oops. We'll get someone on that.
Well, the problem is that Zeldathon is not a member of the team. It just is.
But it is the team.
So we're in a real quandary here.
Does a set of all sets include itself?
Just one last reminder to remember, if you're doing any cool fun fall activities or crafts, especially if they relate to games or even Zelda, put it on social media and tag us at Zeldathons on Twitter, or just regular old Zeldathon on Instagram. We have a TikTok now that you probably want to go check out. Yeah, we're super hip with the kids, y'all. we know what the kids like these days.
I know what the 10-year-old kids like. I don't know if that's the same thing.
It's not. How do you do, fellow kids? Correct, I see. But I also just wanted to say one more time, thank you so much to everybody who's hanging out here today. It is I don't know about y'all, it was awfully soul-filling to me to spend a couple hours chatting about books with my friends. So I hope y'all have enjoyed this conversation as much as we have.
Yeah, thanks for listening to Book Nerds ramble for 2 hours. It was organized rambling. I shouldn't say that.
Trina was worried we weren't going to
I was the rambler.
But we rambled like the best of them.
Yeah. We'll set up a movie watch and chat in Discord. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Go
yeah, we'll watch that movie.
All right. We ready to sign off?
Yeah, I'm ready. Are we ready to raid?
Who are we raiding?
Let's raid Solace and Dread.
Do we have the ability to raid as mods?
I don't know. Let's find out.
Do you know how to raid?
Phil has the ability.
Okay.
Yeah, Phil, take us away.
Do it. Take me away.
All right, we're raiding.
Bye, guys.
Oh, here's the dogs. Dogs are saying hello.
Dogs are saying goodbye.
Goodbye. Yeah, OC's got our hot dog emote to match Annie's face. Yay. You say bye to the friends.
Okay, and we're rating, and I will